Hey guys, welcome to the second episode of Critical Thinking. I didn't think I would make a second one, but here I am. On Critical Thinking, I want to cover subjects that are a little bit misunderstood from the fitness industry. And today, we're going to talk about mobility. Now, mobility has been gaining some popularity. The term, at least, has been gaining a lot of popularity in the past few years. I would compare it to something like functional training or functional movement patterns. When it came out 10 years ago, people didn't really understand the concept. There was a lot of gimmicky stuff around it. Some of it didn't make sense, some of it was good, but it was hard to navigate through the stream of all this information. So, first of all, it would be good to look up a definition of mobility because I do have my own definition, my own explanation of what it is, why is it useful, how it works. But it would be good to first find the definition. Looking online, the Oxford Dictionary defines mobility as the ability to move or to be moved freely and easily. The example for mobility is this exercise helps me retain mobility in damaged joints. Very nice, very nice. Depending on what your level of involvement is with the fitness industry and your overall training experience, your understanding of mobility will vary. You might have even seen the memes where people say, "Oh, I'm gonna go do mobility in the gym," and then you watch them foam roll for about 15 minutes and then do some yoga. And that's not to say that yoga is not mobility, but again, the lines are not very well defined. We have to start with the basic of understandings. We have to look at spectrums of mobility, stability, strength, flexibility. So when you look at flexibility, there's multiple modalities that you can look at. You can look at active flexibility, you can look at passive flexibility, you can look at assisted flexibility. So imagine I'm laying on the ground and I want to bring my leg up as far as it goes to try to stretch my posterior chain or my hamstrings or my lower back. Actively bringing my leg up, I'll get to a certain range, but it'll be limited and I won't be able to go as far as, for example, a passive stretch where I can actually assist myself into a position and then just try to maintain that position passively. So I didn't actively get into that position, but I have the ability to passively hold that position. And then there is an assisted flexibility, which is I can take, for example, an elastic and wrap it around my foot, or I can have literally someone taking my leg and trying to bring it up and trying to create a bigger stretch. So when I have someone assist me, that's the lowest level of flexibility. That's assisted flexibility. Because honestly, I don't have the control, I don't have the strength to get there. The only way I can get into that range of motion is if someone gently pulls me into it. So that's the lowest level of flexibility. Then you have passive flexibility. I can't necessarily get into the position unassisted, but I can hold that position unassisted. So I can passively hold that position. And then there's active flexibility. Active flexibility, I can actually get into the position and hold it. And I'm also going to have a little bit of range of motion where I can produce strength. So for example, if I bring my leg up, I can put a little bit of pressure and I can apply pressure against it. I would call that active flexibility. And in active flexibility, that's where you get at least a little bit of a sense of control. Okay, that's flexibility. Now we have to talk about strength. We'll get to mobility, don't worry. When you look at strength, there's a lot of things you can look at. You can look at the way the strength is produced or the way the muscles are contracted. So is it eccentrically, concentrically, isometrically? That's all fun and good, not relevant to the subject at hand. What we're going to look at is full range of motion of strength and limited range of motion of strength. For example, if I go into the deepest squat I can while being loaded, so not losing my posture, not losing my tension, that would be a full range of motion strength exercise. You could use the same example for squats. I can do a partial squat onto a box or just a half squat where I stop myself before I get into a below parallel squat. Okay. So that would be a limited range strength exercise. When you compare the two, you're going to be able to produce way more strength in a limited range of motion than you're going to be able to produce in a full range of motion. That's all fine and dandy. We have flexibility, we have assisted, we have passive, we have active, and then we have strength, which is full range of motion, and then you have strength, which is limited range of motion. The hard part is, where do you fit mobility in all of this? In my opinion, mobility is the little segment of the line in between the active flexibility and the full range strength. And I think now would be a good time to give my definition of mobility. Basically, mobility is strength applied at the end range of your motion, the maximum range of motion that you can reach, while also challenging your active flexibility. Mobility exercises are closer to strength than flexibility. But again, you have to have both flexibility and strength components to create mobility. You cannot have one or the other, and that, I think, is the biggest misconception in the fitness industry today, is that people confuse mobility with flexibility, and then they don't build any active strength in the end range of motions. They only build passive flexibility. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. If you want to get to a mobility exercise and you're very stiff, chances are you're going to first have to go through assisted flexibility exercises, then you'll have to go to passive flexibility exercises, and then eventually you'll make your way to active flexibility exercise, and then you'll be more or less in the range of mobility. So now that we discussed flexibility, strength, and mobility in the middle, we should talk about, why is mobility useful? Why is stiffness useful? Because yes, stiffness does have a purpose. If I'm relatively mobile and I lose my range of motion in my squat, I can still apply forces in that bottom range of motion, even if it's not a range of motion that I usually squat at. So I can safely bail from the bar and there'll be basically no consequences, because even though it's not a range of motion that I usually train at, I'm still proficient in it and I can still actively apply force. That means I can contract my muscles and I can protect my joints, I can protect my spine. For stiffness, the relationship is a little bit opposite. So you trade safety and range of motion for strength. Meaning, if I'm very stiff, my body's kind of assisting me in applying the force. If you move in a limited range of motion, your body's going to adapt to that limited range of motion. Your risk of injury is going to increase if you go past that range of motion. But since you are so stiff and your body is used to being in that limited range of motion, the forces you'll be able to apply is going to be greater. So for example, someone that does a full depth squat below parallel will be able to squat way more if they only do partial squats. Okay, but if they adapt to the partial squat range of motion, their numbers are going to be insane. They're going to be squatting almost twice as much as when they were squatting full range of motion. But whenever you're going to go to a full range of motion, it's going to be a little bit more riskier. They won't be able to replicate the squat with the same weights in the limited range of motion and full range of motion. Now, I know some will say, well, again, of course, it's a given. We know if you only squat partial, you're going to be able to squat way more if you do a full squat. But this concept isn't really well understood by a lot of people, and it also feeds into defining mobility. There's a lot of other benefits to mobility, like increasing the contraction of the muscles. There's also been studies that show that if you train with a bigger range of motion, you will build more muscle mass. So in that sense, if you increase your mobility, you'll be able to work in a bigger range of motion. And if you're able to work in a bigger range of motion, you'll be able to put on more muscle mass. Plus, you'll reduce your risk of injury. Now, it won't be instantaneous. You'll have to go through the procedures of first increasing your mobility. But once you'll have mobility and you'll be able to apply even small forces in the end range of motion, you'll be able to progressively overload those ranges of motion and build up the weights, and you'll get way more bang for your buck in those limited range of motion than you will taxing your body with heavy weights and high intensities. So now you might be thinking to yourself, well, Evgeny, what's the point of not doing mobility? Why would you want to be stiff? Like I said, partial range of motion will allow you to apply a greater force. So for example, if I'm playing ice hockey I'm never gonna bend my knees past a certain degree. I'm never gonna bend my hips past a certain degree. If I build up mobility in my knees and my hips, yes, it will reduce the risk of injury, but it will limit my overall power output and my overall stability in those positions. For the simple reason that the time that I spend working mobility and that full range of motion is time that I take away from working the limited range of motion and increasing my strength in that limited range of motion. So yes, you can build up incredible strength and great full range of motion, but it comes at the expense of time. And honestly, not everyone has time, especially elite athletes. You might be thinking, who should be doing more mobility? Who should be doing less of it? And honestly, it comes down to each individual. If you've already experienced a lot of injuries and you're prone to injuries, or your sport has a high incidence of specific injuries, you will need to train mobility. If your sport is highly specialized and the production of force is important and the range of motion is non-consequential, then honestly you shouldn't be spending much time for mobility. Finally, there's one thing I haven't covered is soft tissue massage and foam rolling. Like I said at first, the joke of people saying, oh, I'm gonna go do mobility, and then you watch them foam roll for about 15 minutes and do passive stretches for 10 minutes. Foam rolling as a whole is a different subject, and I might cover it in a different critical thinking. But the way you have to view it is manual therapy or massaging soft tissue, whether it's active, passive, whatever manual therapy work you do, is a completely different modality from strength and mobility. Yes, it can help you gain mobility, but it's akin to, I would say, assisted flexibility. You do this with the purpose of eventually getting to mobility work, but doing soft tissue work just for soft tissue work will not increase your mobility. But once again, if you would like me to cover soft tissue, foam rolling, or any other subject that might seem confusing to you from the fitness industry, let me know and I'll do my best to cover the subject to the best of my understanding. Like, subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.